Hello and welcome to Euronews Tonight. The headlines. The call to end the crisis. In a video conference, Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin negotiate the future of Ukraine as a sovereign state. The European Union is contemplating a new policy weapon that would make it easier to impose sanctions on trade rivals like China and even the United States. British government says early signs show Omicron is more transmissible than the Delta variant, but its impact on vaccines is still unclear.
And Rohingya Muslim refugees have filed a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit saying Facebook has not done enough to tackle online hate speech in Myanmar.
Welcome to the program. I'm Stefan Grobe. A high-stakes video call between the US and Russian presidents is taking place amid escalating tensions on Ukraine's eastern front. The call is aimed at trying to reach a breakthrough, but few expect that to happen. Ahead of the call, Washington said Biden would tell Putin that if Russia invades Ukraine, the US will send troops to NATO's eastern front to support Kiev. Moscow could also face its toughest sanctions yet that could severely harm the economy. Russia has sent thousands of troops to the border with Ukraine in recent months, but insists it has no plans to invade. Putin is looking to get a guarantee from his US counterpart that Ukraine will not be allowed to join NATO. Joining me now from Washington, D.C. is our reporter Ray Suarez with more on this. Good evening, Ray. Ray, this is the second one-on-one conversation between Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin. At what point would you call it a success?
Well, a success, Stefan, from whose point of view? Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin share one thing. They'd like to get through this period of U.S. and Russia-Ukraine relations without a hot war in the region. They part company when it comes to assessing what their bottom lines are. Joe Biden is pinned down at home by domestic political considerations, by the continued problems faced by the economy here due to COVID pandemic and other intractable problems that he's finding at home. He doesn't need the distraction of a hot war on the eastern flanks of NATO. At the same time, he's not playing the strongest hand. It is unclear what Biden could do beyond these sanctions. For instance, making it more difficult to change rubles into convertible currencies in banks worldwide. It's hard to know what he could do. He's trying to stay out of a hot war, stay out of a military confrontation with Russia, but he doesn't have the tools at his disposal that Putin has. For one reason, Putin can deal in allegations that simply don't hold any water. For instance, the amassing of troops is said by Russia to be caused by the threat that Ukraine poses to Russia. Well, that's sort of nonsensical on its face. Ukraine poses no threat to one of the most powerful armies on the planet, but this is the pretext under which those troops are massing on the border. Ukraine is still fighting an insurgency inside its own borders that's supplied by Russia. Joe Biden knows this. Vladimir Putin knows this. But the Russian leader, facing no domestic opposition, facing a president who doesn't have complete freedom of movement, knows that he can get away with a lot more than Joe Biden in this regard. Stefan?
Ray, is there a sense in Washington that Putin can be tamed at all?
Well, there is divided opinion on the Russian leader here in the United States. In one camp, he's viewed as sort of a giant, a nervy poker player who rarely sets a foot wrong, while others, and this is an increasing number of observers, diplomats, and Russia experts, are advising American policymakers that it's actually Vladimir Putin who's playing the weak hand here. He has very few tools at his disposal. The Nord Stream 2 pipeline is still not complete, and with a new administration coming in Germany, may be vulnerable to the kinds of sanctions that would reduce the number of euros, the number of dollars, the number of pounds sterling flowing into Russian coffers just as winter is starting to really bite across Northern Europe. So it's unclear where we go from here. It's clear what the two leaders want. Can either afford to let the other side get what it wants? That's what remains to be seen, Stefan.
All right, thank you very much, Ray Suarez, live from Washington. And now let's go to our Russia analyst, Galina Polonskaya. Good evening, Galina. So Putin did speak with Joe Biden, but behind Joe Biden was a united Western front. Is this something that Putin is impressed by?
Good evening, Stefan. Well, it seems to be quite difficult to impress Vladimir Putin, and frankly speaking, he thinks that Europe is doing what Washington tells it to do. That's what we've heard from him and from other Russian top political leaders. But indeed, Joe Biden, before those talks, spoke with the leaders of Italy, France, UK, Germany, and they all agree that what is happening at the Russia-Ukraine border is really alarming, and they show support to each other towards what is happening. But even if Vladimir Putin is impressed by such unification, his plan is not to show that. He wants to test how far can Russia push, because Russia wants to see Ukraine to be weak. And so today that's what he will be doing behind those closed doors, teleconference format talks with Joe Biden. Mr. Putin's spokesperson Dmitry Peskov refused to comment a question about sanctions today. He said that it is not confirmed yet whether those talks, reports in the media about the sanctions were false or not. He called all of what is happening information hysteria, and anyways, Russia says that it is used to sanctions policy of Washington and will not be surprised by how. But however, Stefan, some experts are commenting those sanctions in Russia and saying that some of them, like cutting Russia from a global SWIFT banking system, would be an apocalypse for the Russian economy.
Well, let me ask you this. What is Putin's endgame in Ukraine? Does he really think that he could risk a major international conflict over a, politically unstable neighbor?
Well, many experts think that Vladimir Putin has not made up his mind yet, but he surely wants to show that Russia would not be afraid of any sanctions and would do what it needs to be done if it decides to. I have spoken with Andrei Kartunov. He is the head of Russia International Affairs Council, which is very close to the Kremlin. Well, he says that what is happening is not any preparation for any military intervention. He said that if Vladimir Putin wanted this, no one would even notice such preparations and would only understand when Russian soldiers would be already on the territory of Ukraine. So Andrei Kartunov told me that what is happening on the border, this mass troops gathering, is just a message, a warning to Ukraine and the US, a warning of Russia, who says, don't cross my red lines. Let's listen more.
There are two clear red lines. This is some kind of major offensive of the Ukrainian army on the territory of Donbass, with an attempt to seize this territory, or at least greatly change the balance of forces in Donbass in our favor. And secondly, everyone understands that Ukraine will not join NATO in the near future. But if such an opportunity is formed, then this is the red line that can provoke Moscow to take decisive action.
So Russia wants Ukraine to stay away from Donbass and NATO, and surely Vladimir Putin spoke about this with Joe Biden. Those talks are taking place behind the closed doors. It means that we will not know much about what they discussed together, the presidents of Russia and the United States. And even though many experts do not expect any breakthroughs from those talks, the stakes are really high.
All right, Galina Polonskaya, our Russia analyst, thank you so much for your assessment. Aware of potential trouble areas, not just over Ukraine, but on multiple fronts, the EU wants to increase its ability to impose economic sanctions more easily on rivals like Russia or China. For more on what's being proposed, let's head to Brussels to speak to Shona Murray. And there she is. Good evening, Shona. So the EU is hoping to introduce proposals to prevent big players like Russia, like China, from interfering economically. How will they do that?
Well, so Stefan, this is essentially an EU proposal at the moment at Commission level where they can target third countries like China, like Russia, which consistently try to coerce certain EU member states to change laws, to change principles, and they do so in a way that's economically damaging. So if you look at, for example, China recently coercing Spain to change its criminal law in relation to warrants of arrest for Chinese politicians over human rights abuses. We also saw it very recently with Lithuania and China as well, where China has blocked imports of Lithuanian goods over its relationship with Taiwan. So essentially what the European Commission wants to do is act fast in solidarity with all those member states that have been targeted by China and by Russia. Now, earlier today I caught up with Professor John O'Brennan from Maynooth University in Ireland, and I asked him how he sees this working out.
Both Russia and China have significant leverage over the EU. That in itself impels some forms of cooperation amongst the member states, but very often it's the case, as for example with relations with Russia, really serious in 2014 when Crimea was invaded. And the EU response consisted of a heightened form of sanctions on selected individuals. But at the very same time, the member states were doing things bilaterally with Russia, which actually undermined the collective effort to sanction Russia. And those sanctions, remember, are meant to bring about a change in behavior by the Putin regime. Look at what Germany did in continuing with the Nord Stream project. That project itself gives Putin enormous leverage over Germany and, by extension, the European Union.
That's Professor John O'Brennan from Maynooth University in Ireland talking about those proposals from the Commission today, which would allow the EU sanction countries like China, like Russia, much quicker, using only a majority support from member states. Normally you need unanimity, and essentially would mean that there will be customs sanctions against those countries, the loss of intellectual property rights, loss of EU funding, in the case that they tried to coerce member states like Lithuania of recent weeks in a way that is damaging economically to the European Union. Stefan?
All right, Shona Murray there in Brussels. Thank you very much. The UK government says early indications appear to suggest the Omicron COVID-19 variant is more transmissible than the prevalent Delta strain. But London says it's too early to know whether the variant causes severe illness. More than 400 cases of Omicron have been identified in the UK so far. The health minister says community transmission is now playing a role in the spread of the virus, although further measures to stem it have not yet been discussed. Let's bring in John Ferguson, head of Economist Impact's Globalization, Trade and Finance Practice. Welcome and thank you for joining us, John. So, global companies are once again dealing with a new variant, which means once again supply chain issues and distribution challenges. How serious is this going to be?
Yeah, hi Stefan. Thanks so much for having me on. Very serious, but it's just another layer of uncertainty in an already difficult situation for global companies. They've been dealing with this issue now for almost 2 years. And it's just a very, very difficult trading environment for global companies. So this latest variant, and there could be more in the future, it just adds another difficult chapter for global companies trying to get their supply chains and get their products to us at this very important time of year.
So companies have certainly learned from the pandemic so far. To what extent are they better prepared this time?
They are. It's a great question, Stefan. I actually think they are better prepared. It doesn't mean that we're out of the woods. It doesn't mean that everything's perfect. But compared to where they were 2 years ago, I think companies are better prepared now. Basically, what companies have been doing is diversifying their supply chains, basically looking to try and find alternative suppliers. And with the latest variant, and you just talked about the uncertainty there here in the UK where I sit, companies are now looking around the world and asking themselves, do we need to put those backup plans in place? Do we need to go to that alternative supplier? But they may not have had that alternative supplier 2 years ago. So it's very difficult news, very difficult trading environment, but companies have been preparing for more episodes like this.
So looking ahead, increased resilience to shocks is the name of the game here. Are companies working on that for the future already? Is that something they are treating seriously?
Absolutely. But also, again, it's easy to say. Everyone wants more resilient supply chains, whether that's governments or companies themselves. The challenge, Stefan, is trying to manage a resilient supply chain that's also cost efficient. So that's the long-term aim, and I think we're getting there. But at this stage, it's an aim with a lot of steps to take before we get truly resilient supply chains that are also cost efficient. You know, there's a big inflation debate, which I'm sure you've discussed many times. So these things can't add too much pressure to supply chains and prices in the stores. So balancing resilience and cost is a really key challenge, probably over the next 4 to 5 years for companies.
All right, John Ferguson from Economist Impact in London. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Rohingya refugees have sued the parent company of Facebook, saying the platform has failed to tackle hate speech that incited violence in Myanmar. Let's head to Matthew in the Cube for this story.
Well, Stefan, for years, Rohingya refugees have been complaining about Meta, the big tech giant formerly known as Facebook. They say that hateful posts and content on the platforms have been inciting real-world violence against the Muslim ethnic group from the likes of Myanmar's military government and its supporters. Lawyers for these refugees also now say that Facebook has helped to spread misinformation, which they say has led to Myanmar's government being allowed to carry out a campaign of, in their words, ethnic cleansing. Lawyers for these Rohingya Muslim refugees now suing Meta in the United States for compensation worth more than $150 billion US. That's more than 133 billion euros. Lawyers in the United Kingdom say they are also going to file a similar complaint. And these legal actions don't just impact the around 10,000 Rohingyas currently in the United States. It's said to represent any Rohingya Muslim refugee who has faced violence or indeed has lost a relative to the persecution. Now, Facebook has not responded to this latest claim. It's the latest in a series of accusations about political violence and misinformation that have been leveled against the big tech giant. Back in 2018, a United Nations human rights expert had said that Facebook had failed to stop misinformation and hateful posts about Rohingya Muslim refugees. This, the latest example of these, and it all focuses again on algorithms. We've previously heard in recent months from the likes of Facebook whistleblower Frances Haugen, who says that the platforms have been putting profit before people's safety. And lawyers for these Rohingya Muslim refugees say that Facebook's algorithms have essentially contributed to this. They say the company did not spend enough money to moderate content in local languages and did not prevent people from understanding the local political situation. Facebook, it is worth noting, Stefan, have removed Myanmar's military from its platforms following that February coup, but this latest class action lawsuit in the United States says that the company still needs to be held responsible for, in their words, turning the other way.
A province in Argentina has filed criminal charges against the farmer over the death of hundreds of Magellanes penguins. Clemens Waller reports.
The incident occurred north of the Punta Tombo Reserve, a natural sanctuary home to one of the largest colonies of this protected species. Bulldozers destroyed hundreds of nests to open up a rural road, and electric fences were installed, disturbing the penguins' journey to the sea and their natural feeding cycles.
There is a clear destruction of habitat that is something so important for this species, that is so faithful to its nesting ground, which is where penguins meet their partners year after year. They live 35 years. Sometimes we have followed couples that have been 17 years together, but if there is no nest there, there is no meeting place, and this is the place where they raise their young.
Experts from the Ministry of the Environment were sent to the site to evaluate the damages, considered irreparable by the ministry. According to the president of the Global Penguin Society, almost 300 chicks and eggs were destroyed. The Punta Tombo Reserve is home to one of the most diverse seabird colonies in Argentina, hosting a penguin population of almost 500,000. The penguins arrive in September for breeding, returning to the same nests they used the previous year. The chicks are born in November. The penguin colony is one of the main tourist attractions in the region, bringing in some 85,000 tourists each season.
We'll leave you with a no comment from the southwestern coast of Ireland, where Storm Barra's strong winds and floods have left 60,000 homes without power. Thanks for watching Euronews Tonight. See you soon.